In this episode, I am speaking with Kevin Kelly, who is the author of Excellent Advice for a Living, Wisdom I Wish I Had Known Earlier. On his 68th birthday, Kevin Kelly began to write down for his adult children some things that he had learned about life that he wished he had known earlier. To his surprise, Kelly had more to say than he thought and kept adding to the advice over the years, compiling a life's wisdom into these pages. When I read this book, I was smiling the entire time. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 328 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I am speaking with Kevin Kelly, who is the author of Excellent Advice for a Living, Wisdom I Wish I Had Known Earlier. On his 68th birthday, Kevin Kelly began to write down for his adult children some things that he had learned about life that he wished he had known earlier. To his surprise, Kelly had more to say than he thought and kept adding to the advice over the years, compiling a life's wisdom into these pages. When I read this book, I was smiling the entire time. Here's the short version of Kevin's incredible biography. Kevin Kelly is Senior Maverick at Wired magazine. He co-founded Wired in 1993 and served as its executive editor for the first 7 years. His newest book, Excellent Advice for a Living, a book of 450 modern proverbs for good living. He is co-chair of the Long Now Foundation, a membership organization that champions long-term thinking and acting as a good ancestor to future generations. And he is founder of the popular Cool Tools website, which has been reviewing tools daily for 20 years. From 1984 to 1990, Kelly was publisher and editor of the Whole Earth Review, a subscriber-supported journal of unorthodox conceptual news. He co-founded the ongoing Hackers Conference and was involved with the launch of Well, a pioneering online service started in 1985. Other books by Kelly include The Inevitable, a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Out of Control, his 1994 classic book on decentralized emergent systems, The Silver Cord, a graphic novel about robots and angels, What Technology Wants, a robust theory of technology, and Vanishing Asia, his 50-year project to photograph the disappearing cultures of Asia. He is best known for his radical optimism about the future. This episode is sponsored by Career Pivot Community, but more on that later. Without any delay, let's get to my discussion with Kevin Kelly. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Kevin Kelly, who is the author of Excellent Advice for a Living, Wisdom I Wish I Had Known Earlier. Welcome to the podcast.
It's my privilege and honor to be here. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Well, someone said, well, you need to talk to Kevin Kelly. He's got this book. So I talked to your publicist. They sent me a copy of the book, and I started reading through all the 450 proverbs, and it just made me smile because a lot of these I really resonate. A lot of them I say them myself. Kevin, what's the story behind the book, and why did you write this at this stage of life?
I have 3 children, and they're now young adults, and I am I was approaching 70, and I decided that since we did not preach very much to our kids, we didn't really tell them much of advice. Our parenting style was to do things, show them, not to say. And but as I was in the habit of writing down little proverbs for myself to help me remember them, to change my behavior, I realized that there were things that I was writing down that I wished I'd known earlier in my life, and so that I should write down the things that I really believed were useful and practical for my 3 kids. And I started doing that in a very short list of 68 that I did on my 68th birthday, and I shared it with them, and I posted it on my blog later, and it kind of went viral. And many people responded to it, and I decided to do another list the next year, and then I did another list the next year, and they kept going viral. And so they were available on the internet, but I wanted to have them all in one place so that someone could hand them to someone else in a very convenient package, and that was the birth of the book.
I can see this probably took a long time to create, and a lot of thought behind each one, it's obvious you're an artist. I am not. I have an artistic bone in my body. So I didn't quite understand all the art metaphors, but that's okay. So like the first one that I really just jumped out at me is, don't be afraid to ask a question that may sound stupid, because 99% of the time, everyone else is thinking the same question and is too embarrassed to ask it.
Yeah. I learned that in school, where I would be sitting up front, raising my hand and asking the stupid questions. I didn't think they were stupid, but I was just asking the question. And without embarrassment, whenever I didn't understand anything, I'd go, wait, I don't understand that. And then kids would come up later saying, thank you for asking that, because I had the same question. They didn't say I was too embarrassed. They just said I had the same question. And so I realized, there's a value in doing that. Just if I don't understand something, I will say it right away. And that actually served me well later on editing a magazine, because if I didn't understand something in a piece, a magazine piece that I was editing, I would say, I don't understand this. You've got to explain it better. And that's a lot of what editing became.
Yeah, where it came to me was, I spent a lot of time training engineers in China, where they wouldn't ask me questions. So I used to have to schedule dances during the day with my young field engineers, because I was the teacher and I knew everything, and they wouldn't ask me questions, but they'd ask other people questions. Mm-hmm. So I had to find who would they ask questions to, because they weren't going to ask them to me. And so, yes. The other one I really liked, the second one, was, don't measure your life with someone else's ruler.
Yeah. I think another way of saying that, I don't think I included it in the book, is you kind of want to try and invent a new and unique definition of success. You wanted to define your own terms of success, and it probably should not include money. If you are successful in that endeavor of having a new definition of success, it'll be a lot easier to attain than someone else's definition of success. So you're more likely to reach it, and you'll be happier in the long run, because it'll be as you define it, for your own strengths, your own abilities, your own talents, your own background, your own experience.
Well, particularly when you're doing something new and you want to measure yourself against someone who's already doing it, it's not fair.
That's right. And it's also not, if you're measuring yourself against someone else who's very, very successful, you're unlikely ever to displace them. And so you're always going to fall short. And there can only be the best golf player in the world, the number one. Only one person can be number one, and it's very easy to displace them. And so if you're trying to fill that niche, that's a very tough road, because there's a lot of people trying to do that. And if you have your own measure, then it's easier to be successful.
Well, and I just had Bruce Feiler on the podcast.
Yes.
And he talks about the fact that a lot of the books around the American success story is largely BS today. Bring you up from the bootstraps and pull yourself up, and rags to riches. And by the way, most of that's BS. And so measuring your own success, you have to figure out your own way to measure success. And that's why I say I don't like using someone else's ruler. Another one that I really stood out to me is a great way to understand yourself is to seriously reflect on everything you find irritating in others.
Yeah. Yeah. We tend to embody opposites. And if you find something really, really irritating, that means that there is something in you that resonates with that. It doesn't mean that you're like that. It means that our virtues are basically our vices at the extreme, and our vices are our virtues at the extreme. And so it's a way of self-examination, a way of looking at yourself, a way of understanding yourself by focusing on those things that you are most annoyed at, because there is something in your persona that resonates with that to some degree.
Yeah, it's in my past life, I've used a lot of personality assessments. And one of the things I discovered was the people I had the hardest time getting along with were people just like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And that was a real eye-opener going, oh.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
like magnets that repel.
Yes. Well, it's kind of like at my first tech startup, I had a woman who worked for me who was an engineer, and she was married to an engineer. I told her, you can't do that. We usually marry our opposites.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out she really wasn't an engineer, but but she was a great technical trainer. But it's like, opposites tend to attract.
Right.
Another one I thought was really good is whenever you have a choice between right or being kind, be kind, no exceptions, and don't confuse kindness with weakness.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a theme in the book about the virtues of being kind. And by the way, it's better to be kind than right. And it's a skill like anything else that you can get better at. Some people are more naturally kind than others, but this is true of all the things in this book, all the virtues, is that, they're unevenly distributed at the start, but we can always improve them, whether it's musical ability, kindness, optimism, imagination. These are all skills that you and I can get better at. And so you make habits out of them, and kindness is one of those things. And it's a weird thing, but the most selfish thing you can do is to be generous and kind, right? It's kind of weird, right? It's like, it doesn't make sense, but there it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Growing up, my mother entered Columbia University at the age of 13 in 1931, spoke 5 languages. Total pain in the ass. And one of the things my mother taught me was being right was really important, which got me in a lot of trouble. And particularly, it's also one of the things I'm known for saying is you're not always right. And when you're not right, by the way, be kind to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can be kind to others, but very often being kind to ourselves is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So Be kind, no exceptions.
Yes. I'll pick out a couple more, and then I'm going to ask you for some. The one I really liked here is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Hang out with and learn from people smarter than yourself. Even better, find smart people who will disagree with you.
Yeah, that's the real trick. I say elsewhere in the book that when you're picking a partner, whatever it's for marriage or business, you want to find someone, not someone that you don't disagree with, but someone that you like to disagree with. Finding smart people that you like to be around that will disagree with you is a real challenge, but there is nothing more valuable than being able to do that in several different ways. One is because they will always challenge you and you'll continue to grow. But secondly, you also will learn the skill of learning how to disagree productively.
I spent a lot of my career as a geek that could speak. And I talked on very technical subjects, and trying to get other professional speakers to say, give me constructive criticism. I want it, bring it on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had to cultivate those relationships to tell them, by the way, tell me when I suck.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me when you don't understand me.
Right.
Or when my stories don't work. I need someone else to tell me that. Yep. So finding other people who are, as you say, smarter than you and will give you that feedback.
Yeah, is very incredibly valuable. And you also, one other bit of advice in the book that's related is that you want to get your feedback and criticism as early as possible in things that you're doing. So I'm a big believer in making things in public, so to speak, once they're hatched. That hatching period has to be protected from criticism and judgment. But once they're kind of hatched and on their way, getting feedback from people, you want to do it before they're done, because once it's done, you can't change it. So you want to have it in this iterative process where you're having people use it, you're having people look at it, you're having people respond to it, so that you can actually use that feedback in making it better, rather than just having it in Amazon reviews where it does no good at that point in terms of making the product better.
Yep. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot membership community. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learn from each other and broaden their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Alec had to say about the community.
Well, you can't underestimate the value of community, right? To start this transition in my life and to be able to connect with others who were going through it, who had maybe perhaps made the same missteps that I had made, right? Or to the extent to which I could learn from them and not make certain mistakes or share my experience. It really just was a very giving place for me to share information, laugh about the highs and lows, and get information from other people who were interested in my story as much as I was interested in hearing about theirs.
You can't just join the community. I bring people into the community every few months in groups. You can sign up for the waiting list, so when I open the door for new members, you'll be notified. If you're interested in learning more about the endeavor and sign up for the waiting list, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, back to the episode. Another one that I really liked, and this is a common theme with a lot of these, is pros make as many mistakes as amateurs.
Mhm.
They've just learned how to gracefully recover from their mistakes.
Yeah, this is a shock. Something I didn't know, I didn't realize until I saw professionals at work, and YouTube has been really fantastic for this, to see professionals who are doing things, whether they're construction or they're makers or they're seamstresses or cooks. But if you actually watch them in action, they're making mistakes all the time. And it's human mistakes, or there's mistakes caused by equipment or interruptions, all the usual things. And the real genius of them is that they've seen other mistakes like this, they've had other experiences, and they can immediately recover from, they know what to do, and they keep going. And I didn't realize that when I was first making things and getting things done, whether it be a magazine article or building a house or trying to repair something. I thought that the professionals just never made mistakes, and my own mistakes were just a sign of failure, a sign of being an amateur. It turned out that wasn't true. And now when I'm making something, whether it's a movie, whether it's a website, whether it's a talk, I expect things to not work at first. I expect things to break along the way. I expect to throw away the first version. That's part of the process. And once you kind of accept that and understand that, making mistakes are something you expect to do, and you just want to get really good at recovering from them.
Yeah. No, years ago when I worked for IBM, I used to teach problem determination.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I gained from that experience was, if you're trying to solve a problem and you've seen a problem like it in the past, doesn't have to be the same problem, you'll solve it that much faster. So gaining all that experience, and the way you very often gain that experience is by making mistakes.
Right.
And I will never forget when my son was quite young and he was playing soccer, and there was one young kid, he was 8, 9 years old, he was playing goalie, and his father kept on chastising him for every time he made a mistake. It's like, no, that's how we learn. We don't naturally know all this stuff. We try stuff, which takes me back to one of your others, is prototype your life. Try stuff instead of making grand plans. And that, I think, applies for you anytime in your life.
It does. And also applies for businesses too, if you're starting a business, whatever. So grand plans are usually abstract and perfect. And doing prototypes will make them real. And real things are always superior to abstract things. So it's this idea of avoiding to make a plan, because we're just terrible at predictions, and it's very, very, very hard to predict the future. And so you want to be constantly like steering a car, just making these little adjustments as you go along. If you're planning to go and never changing the wheel, you're just not going to reach there. It's going to veer off. So you want to be constantly adjusting things, and you do that by prototyping. Prototyping can mean that you do in classical way. You can make something, you make it out of cardboard first. So you do a drawing and then a piece of cardboard, and then you do a first version, and then you throw away the first version and you make the real thing. And when they do movies these days, Hollywood, they have a script they start with, which is one version, and then they have a storyboard and another version. They do animatronics, and they are literally making and remaking the movie many, many times. And each time it's a little bit fuller and clear, but they're throwing away all those intermediate steps in order to make something great. And so you can do the same thing with your life, where instead of quitting your job and raising a lot of money and having a 5-year plan for a business, you do an experiment where you prototype and you take $500 and you spend it making the first one and seeing if anybody likes it. And you go from there. And so you creep and inch your way towards something really great in iterative steps, which is a kind of a failure management mode. You're managing failure. You're keeping the failure small, often fast, and forward. That's what you want to do. It's a way of failing better.
Yeah, though I had Diane Wu David on the podcast. She wrote the book Future Proof a couple of years ago. And she has a chapter in her book on experimenting in your career. And the idea is to do small, low-risk projects on the side to see if you even like it.
Right.
Because, in fact, I have a chapter in my book on what I call MSU disorder, and MSU stands for make stuff up.
Uh-huh.
We think, well, let's go do this. This will be great. And how do you know that? Well, you made it up.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Go try it.
I'm shocked by the number of people I've met who graduated from college, went to law school, studied law, got a law degree, and within 1 month of being a lawyer, they realized that they hated it. It was like, why did you never think about like interning at a lawyer for like 6 months? Spending a day following a lawyer around? It's like they had never tried that. There was just this abstract thing that they thought they would be good, or maybe from the movies, and they had never tried it, never done the experiment, never prototyped it. And so this idea of prototyping your life is where, well, you're thinking, I like to be a doctor. Okay. Spend a summer working in a doctor's office, volunteering, and you'll decide then if you want to be a doctor.
Yep. No, the lawyer metaphor is a perfect one, because I know more miserable lawyers. And at least before we left for Mexico, in Texas, the number one profession that has the highest unemployment rate is lawyers.
Uh-huh.
Almost half the people who have gained law degrees are not working in law.
Right.
So why did you do that? Another one I really liked, and this fits in with the chapter in my book. If you ask for someone's feedback, you'll get a critic. But if instead you ask for advice, you'll get a partner.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of semantic shift, but it's important, because what's the difference? The difference is that when you're asking for advice, they're on your team. If you're asking for feedback, they're on the other team. And so you want them on your team.
Well, one of the ways I like to say it, I have an acronym which I stole from somebody else, called asking for AIR, advice, insights, and recommendations. And when you ask for advice, it's a compliment.
That's true.
And people will rarely turn you down. And if they give you good advice, and you can, it's a good way to start a relationship.
Right. Well, in the book, there's another related piece, which is that this is true in Silicon Valley, where I live, which is that particularly people trying to raise money, which is if you ask someone for money, they give you advice. But if you ask them for advice, they'll give you money.
Yeah. And
so that's also true, as you said, because it's a sign of respect.
Yeah. The other one that I'm going to slightly modify: you are never too young or old to wonder, why am I still doing this?
Right.
You need to have an excellent answer.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously old people can be stuck in their ways, but so can young people too.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the real challenges. I help a lot of people create encore careers. And my business is Career Pivot. So this repurpose your career is very often we get stuck in inertia.
Mm-hmm.
And I use the example, about 7 years ago, I'd lived in Austin, Texas. I've been living there for about 40 years. And I read a book by Dr. Henry Cloud called Necessary Endings. And one of the key things is why am I still in Austin? It wasn't the cheap, funky place I found in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1970s, the most affordable housing market in the country. It was a fun place to be. Now it's expensive and it's crowded. And so why am I still here? And I couldn't come up with a good answer.
Yeah.
And that's what got us started exploring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that really hit me. The other one is when you are young, have friends who are older. When you are old, have friends who are younger.
Yeah.
And I've had a bunch of, I've written a number of things on ageism, and I've had a bunch of folks on the podcast, experts on dealing with ageism. And one of the key things is throughout our society, we naturally age segregate.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
So to accomplish that, you have to break out of this, what naturally we tend to do.
Yep. It's true. Also, this is a complete tangent, but basically true in my own experience. We tend to segregate based on our heights.
Okay.
It's true. Most of my closest friends are about my height.
Okay. I'll have to think about that. I used to be 6'4". I've shrunk in my old age. I'm about 6'2" now, but I'll have to think about that. Do a couple more. This I like. It's thrilling to be extremely polite to rude strangers.
I find it so. You have to really work at it and control, and you have to. Yeah, it's against the grain and it's against your natural instinct. But if you can do it, it's thrilling.
Well, it's just the fact that when someone really gets angry or gets rude and you realize, wow, they're really behaving pretty stupid, and I'm not going to go down that path with them.
Right. And what helps me is another bit of advice I have in the book, which is two things. One is sometimes I play in my mind that I treat their meanness or their rudeness as if they had an affliction, as if they couldn't help it, which helps my compassion. But more importantly, it's this idea that it's often that the proper response is compassion because it's a form of pain. That's how they're expressing pain. So there's it's when there's someone super angry, that's really an expression of pain, and so that enables me to be more compassionate about that and treat them politely.
This one, having been a professional speaker for 30 or 40 years and having lots of inexperienced people interviewed, to get better at speaking, watch a recording of yourself speaking. It is shocking and painful, but an effective way to improve.
Yeah. Nobody likes to see themselves recorded. It's even hard to listen to yourself, but man, it's sobering, and particularly with a coach can be very, very helpful.
Well, I know I edit my own podcasts. By the way, this is going to be episode 327 or so. So I've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years. I know all my filler words. The good news is I can edit them out.
Uh-huh.
You, watching yourself, you will be your own worst critic.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You'll be dismayed by things that other people don't care about at all.
Yes. And it's been interesting where I've interviewed people on the podcast and they say, "Oh, I'm just so worried." I said, "You'll be fine." Usually after I edit, and with a lot of people, I can edit out uhs and ers, and one of the things that I learned doing the podcast was when I'm having a conversation like this, is to learn to stop and think before I talk.
Mm.
If I think and talk at the same time, I get verbal vomit.
Right. And you can edit out the pause
Yeah.
and the thinking. And
Yeah, right.
Very smart.
Right. I wouldn't known how bad I was because some of my early podcast episodes, I had a lot of verbal vomit.
Right.
Right. And okay. It's learning to stop. How do I want to respond to that?
Right.
So when someone puts your book down and they finish it, what do you want them to have gotten out of it?
I would like them to take away maybe 3 of the little proverbs that they remember and that they could internalize in a way and recall, and to change their habits, to change their behavior over time. And they would maybe remember where they came from and be thankful, but that it have some effect on other people to improve their lives in the way that my life has been improved from hearing many of these in some version, somehow or other, from the past of the ancient elders who had heard it from their elders. And so, yeah, it's to try to help people live richer, fuller lives, to be more authentically themselves. And that's my larger mission in life, I would say, is to equip all the people on the planet, born and unborn, to equip them with the necessary tools to unleash their own particular genius in their own way. And those tools include making sure everybody in the world has, clean water, healthcare, freedom of choice, all the things that we would hope to have, plus all the technology that they may need for their particular set of geniuses to develop and expand and share their particular talents with us in a way that nobody before them has. And so that's my dream. And if this book can help that along the way, then it's a raging success.
Well, Kevin, I said, I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. I said, reading through the book, it wasn't what I expected, because suddenly I'm just reading through pages and pages of proverbs that I said, that just made me smile, because so many of them, either I say myself, or I've thought,
Right.
or I've gone, that's true.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm glad you appreciate it. Maybe 1 or 2 would stick with you as well and help you in your own journey. Sounds like you are on this path to becoming not just the best, but the only, which is what I think all of us hope for. It sounds like you have a pretty singular occupation, if I might say. So I greatly appreciate your time sharing with what you love, and I am really, really honored to be here.
Well, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
My pleasure.
I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with Kevin Kelly. I encourage you to pick up a copy of this book and smile like I did when I read it. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You will get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you'll receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-328. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.